All right, people, time for a news segment in which I try to predict the future. I lost my crystal ball. I was looking for it. I can't find it, so I had to turn to Twitter instead. And so what I thought we would do here is ask the question of what current modern songs will be considered future classics, because it's always kind of hard to know in the moment what those classics will be. Like, it's not the same as commercial success, because there's a lot of bands that back in their prime were extremely successful. For example, like Hoobastank and Shinedown both sold probably tens of millions of albums. But have you ever met anybody that said one of their influences was Hoobastank or Shinedown? No. On the other hand, there's also bands that were not very successful or not very commercially successful, but ended up becoming super influential, and we decided they were classics years down the line, as I've talked about before. And so my question is, if you think about what the defining classics were of the previous eras, for example, the Mall Screamo era would be like Welcome to the Black Parade, I Write Sins Not Tragedies, and Misery Business. And then the Scene era a few years later, the classics would probably be like Downfall of Us All, Chelsea Smile, and Situations by Escape the Fate. My question is, what current songs will we think are classics in the future? So I asked on Twitter. I picked a few of them, and we can just go down the list and see what we think. And also, I'd like to thank Factor for sponsoring this video. They make nutritious, chef-prepared meals delivered straight to your door, so you have the time and energy to tackle everything on your to-do list. And I don't know about you, but my list is always getting longer. I've been working with them for quite a while now, and I genuinely think Factor is awesome. For me, it's about saving time while still eating clean. It cuts down on trips to the grocery store and cooking, which means that I have more time to focus on my channel and all my other projects. And honestly, I just do not enjoy cooking, but I do care a lot about hitting my macros. And if you eat out a lot, it's also a great way to save money. It's way cheaper than takeout, or even worse, getting delivery, which honestly is a complete ripoff and waste of money. And Factor is ready in just 2 minutes, so it's also faster. And they also have a ton of options like Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, Vegan and Veggie. There are 34 chef-prepared, dietitian-approved weekly choices. So personally, I love that I don't have to think about what I'm going to eat for lunch. I just pick something and I know that it's going to taste good, but I'm also going to hit my macro goals. So if you want to check out Factor, and honestly, I think you should, go to factor75.com or click the link below and use the code FIN50 to get 50% off your first Factor box. One name that came up quite a bit is Turnstile. It's coming up on 2 years old, but all of Glow On by Turnstile has to be considered a classic with time. And well, if there's anything that defines a classic, obviously it's being in a Taco Bell ad. The Turnstile fries clearly are evidence that this song will indeed be considered a future classic. Well, there it is. I mean, that's proof right there. But in all seriousness, I do think it's very likely that this is something that people look back on as a classic in 5 or 10 years, especially as being the thing that got a lot of people into hardcore. Even though at this point, Turnstile isn't really exactly like a hardcore band, or at least like sonically, they don't really play hardcore anymore, but they are clearly from the hardcore scene, and I think everyone kind of knows that. Yeah, Blackout is played on my local rock radio station. I saw the lineup for a festival recently where they were like on the same line as, I want to say, like Avenged Sevenfold. So clearly, I mean, they're having a moment, and it took them 10 years to get there because they started in 2010 or whatever. But this album seems to be the one that really got people to mention them. They certainly were doing well before, but this seems to be the album that really got people to pay attention to Turnstile, and I think it is very likely that this will be considered a classic. I don't know if anything is going to be on the same level as My Chemical Romance or Panic at the Disco. I don't know that it's possible for rock to have that kind of a moment now, but I think within the limits of what rock is now, I think this album probably will be considered a classic in the future. I don't know if it's going to be any one song. I think just Turnstile in general is going to be an artist that people look back to in 5 or 10 years as super important and influential. I think that they will indeed be considered one of the classics of this generation. So I'm on board with that one. Another one that lots of people mentioned is To the Hellfire by Lorna Shore, or as I like to call them, Lorn of Shore. Shout out to the boys in Lorn of Shore. To the Hellfire came out in 2020, and I would say single-handedly put deathcore, I guess, back on the map. Deathcore, of course, had been around. Deathcore never went away, but it was kind of fading. It had sort of just been a genre that really only like Reddit nerds were into for a long time. This song, without a doubt, put the genre back on the map, and of course created, zillions and zillions of copycats and whatnot. And again, this is sort of inherently not going to be as appealing. That will never be as mainstream as a Panic at the Disco or a Fall Out Boy or something like that, because it's deathcore, not pop punk or emo or whatever. So the audience is inherently more limited than that. But I think within the confines of deathcore, absolutely no question about it. I think Suicide Silence was the defining band of the first era of deathcore. There's lots of other good bands from that era, like Winds of Plague and Despised Icon, As Blood Runs Black, but Suicide Silence, definitely the definitive band of that era, and Lorna Shore is the definitive band of this era of deathcore. No question about it. I'm sure that if you watch interviews with bands in 10 years and ask them what got them into, heavy music, I think there's going to be a lot of people that say this song, they're going to say, oh, when I was 15, I saw To the Hellfire on TikTok, and that's kind of what got me started on this whole journey into weird ass shit. That's what I think. So I would agree with that one. I thought this was an interesting sentiment here from Cult of Eon. I think the classics ended in the 90s. We live in an era of niche entertainment. Radio rock was big in the 90s. After that, music went online and the music industry got divided. I do think that there's some truth to this in the sense of we no longer live in an era of like a monoculture. But I think the 2000s were probably when, at least for rock, that's when rock was actually, the last time rock was like super big was TRL. And if you remember TRL, which, as anyone older than, 25 or something probably remembers, that was MTV's like video countdown show. TRL had a whole lot of pop punk and nu metal on there, right along with NSYNC and Backstreet Boys. Like, I was watching some TRL videos the other day, and there's one where it's 98 degrees, like actually kind of like facing off against Blink-182. Korn was on there all the time. Fred Durst was on there quite a bit. And then, of course, like Sum 41, Newfound Glory, and Simple Plan were on there quite a bit. So I don't think that the classics ended in the 90s, but I do think the 2000s was the last time that rock really had that kind of like a mainstream presence with young people. And it's true that there's no longer like a monoculture. Back then, we were all watching the same things. We were all paying attention to the same pop culture moments. And that doesn't exist anymore. Now it's like, there isn't like one big culture. There's like a million small subcultures, each of which have their own like big events and, personalities and stuff like that. So I disagree with his timing here. But I do agree with the point, the larger point, that, the culture around rock has kind of fundamentally changed. And I don't think we're going to get anything like we did back then. Another artist that somebody brought up, which I like a lot, this person has a lot of good picks here, but the one that stood out to me was I Disagree by Poppy, which was one of my favorite releases of the past 5 years. This came out at the end of 2019, I think. One of my favorite things. I love this album. I love this album. I think this is one of the most interesting, like, creative albums that I've heard, in the last 10 years, probably. I absolutely love it. However, I do not think that this is going to be regarded as a classic, unfortunately. It should be. This album is amazing and great, and I love it. But it feels like she sort of had her moment, and it came and went, and she's sort of not really doing the metal stuff anymore. It's too bad, because I think she's really cool and talented. This album might just be a little bit too advanced for people. I think if you know, you know. Unfortunately, I don't think this one is going to go down as a classic. I hope I'm wrong, but I don't think it will. One that a lot of people brought up, maybe they were trolling, but I agree with it. I think it's a good pick. This person, Cap/Productions, had a few suggestions, but the one that stood out to me was I Think I'm Okay by MGK. He said his only good song, in my opinion. I think MGK has a few songs that are good, but this is like his best song for sure. I think this song is legitimately actually great. This is a really good song. Yeah, Youngblood sounds great on this one. I remember when this came out, and I never really cared about MGK's rap stuff. I was familiar with it, but I never really liked it. This came out, and I was like, damn, this song is actually really fucking good. This, to me, was like one of the best pop punk songs I had heard in a very, very long time. I'm the one on the run away from the headlights. No sleep. Really good. Great video, cool vibe, good lyrics. And Youngblood sounds great. I don't know that it's going to be this song. I feel like maybe My Ex's Best Friend or Bloody Valentine are maybe more likely to be the song that kind of defines MGK's pop punk phase. But regardless, I do think that something from MGK's catalog, probably the whole Tickets to My Downfall album would be my guess, is going to go down as a classic. And I know that people are going to hate this. I know that, you know, everyone, we're going to put this on YouTube, and I know everyone in the comments is going to be raging and, you know, calling me an MGK stan and blah, blah, blah. But I'm telling you, it went to #1 on Billboard. It put the genre of pop punk back on the map. It sold millions of copies. There are millions and millions of kids who discovered this kind of music through him. Again, you know, people are going to look back on it in the same way as people look back on Blink and Sum 41 and all those other TRL gateway pop punk bands from the 2000s, which, if you remember back then, everybody, all the, you know, credible people, the gatekeepers and media people and stuff, hated all that shit. They hated it. Nobody was more hated than Blink back then. They had zero credibility. Zero. It's exactly right. People don't remember Blink was seen the same way as we see MGK now. That's the truth. So people will gatekeep MGK in 20 years. Trust me, just the same way as people gatekeep Blink now, they're going to do the same thing with MGK in the future. This person talking about MGK as well, Derek Flores, says the entire Tickets to My Downfall album, other than that, probably nothing. Rock and metal is in this weird state where it feels like everything's been done. You know, I kind of feel like there's a part of me that agrees with that, and I don't want to be like the old guy, although I am old. But I kind of do feel like everything in rock has been done. At least it's been a very long time since anything came out that sounded new to me. There's new artists, but there haven't been any new sound. Yeah, Polyphia, that's true. I mean, there's a little bit here and there, but I kind of feel like it's like, where can you really go with rock now before it stops being rock? You know, to me, like alternative music in general continues to evolve. For example, all the emo rap stuff, for sure, that is something new and different. But it's not really rock. You know, that's like alternative music, but it's not really rock. It's rock adjacent. So I agree with that. The best innovations were in pop and rap at this point. I think that's true. I think rock has kind of, you know, as long as people in rock insist on rock being, you know, guitars, bass, drums, and vocals, which is something they are very insistent on, as long as they insist on limiting the definition to that, I think it's true. Paris and 1,000 Rounds will be classics. They will be. Whether that's considered rock, though, I mean, I made a video about Suicide Boys talking about how they had reinvented punk and everyone hated it and said they weren't punk. So I think it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy because the rock fans, they don't want something new and different, you know? So I hope that Derek is wrong and I hope I'm wrong too. But I kind of agree with it. I think there's something to it, unfortunately. But I hope I'm wrong. Speaking of Polyphia, quite a few people mentioned that. For example, Kai here playing God by Polyphia. And I would say, if you haven't heard it, this is what Polyphia sounds like. Polyphia does sound new and different. I agree with that. This is a new sound, a very fresh new sound. Will this go down as being a classic in the sense of Fall Out Boy or even A Day to Remember? I don't know. It might, but yeah, I think it's a little bit too niche for that. I think in the world of guitar for sure. I think that guitarists will look back on Polyphia in 10 years as being total game changers. 100%. Like, everybody does this like Tim Henson hybrid picking type stuff now. Like, Tim absolutely changed the game in terms of guitar, and it will be a classic in the world of guitar. But I think they will always be a little bit too niche to kind of get outside of that, I think. But there could be someone who's influenced by Polyphia that goes on to do something, super different and genre defining. I don't know. I do think Polyphia is a fantastic band. I have a ton of respect for them. I think their music is great, but I think it's going to be hard for them to break out of that guitar niche. I think, it's not an indictment or anything like that. Mike Skinner mentioned a few artists here, but one in particular I wanted to mention was Popular Monster by Falling in Reverse. And this one I definitely agree with. Falling in Reverse, without a doubt, has been the biggest breakout band of the past 5 years, without a doubt. And I was surprised to see that, because Falling in Reverse has been around for 10 years now. Ronnie's been making music for almost 20 years now. So for him to have this kind of late career breakout was unexpected to me, for sure. And I know right now everybody hates Ronnie. Everyone's mad at Ronnie for lots of reasons. But I gotta say, I'm still on Team Ronnie. Is he an asshole on Twitter sometimes? Absolutely. But you cannot deny this song. 114 million views. Those are huge numbers for a rock band. A huge number of views for a rock band. And right now, Falling in Reverse is on tour, selling out arena shows. He's opening for Avenged Sevenfold. Like him or not, you cannot deny his impact. He's been on the rock charts for fucking 3 years straight. Yeah, the numbers don't lie. Ronnie has a level of support that I cannot think of another artist in the past 10 years that has taken off like Ronnie. So I think he is most definitely going to be a gateway artist, that people are going to point back to him in 10 years again, in the same way as people look at like Limp Bizkit or something like that. The days where a rock band could get as big as Limp Bizkit are over. But I think as far as the current landscape goes, Ronnie's as big as you could get, and people will definitely go back and look at him as a classic, I think. Another band that definitely has to be mentioned here is Ghost. In the sort of real metal world, I would say Ghost is probably the biggest success story of the past 10 years. They came out in 2010, 2011, and pretty much got big right out of the gate. They have, 4 or 5 Billboard top 10 albums. They're selling out arenas. They have a ton of critical respect. Pretty much everybody likes Ghost, other than the metal nerds who criticize them for being insufficiently metal, because that's what metal people do about absolutely everything. I think they're good. It's a little bit too like 70s kind of soft rock for me personally, but it's super catchy. They aren't heavy enough is what I hear a lot. Yeah. Here's the thing. If you want to be successful, do the opposite of whatever Reddit says. Reddit says Ghost isn't heavy enough. Reddit says that clean vocals suck, blah, blah, blah. Reddit hates everything. If you want to be successful, do the literal exact opposite of whatever Reddit says. So the fact that Reddit hates Ghost for not being heavy enough is basically proof that they're doing the right thing. Again, one of the biggest breakout successes. I think that this will be considered a classic for sure. I don't know their catalog well enough to know what specific song. I feel like this was their breakout song, but then they also had Mariana Cross, blew up on TikTok recently, so maybe it's that. I don't know exactly which song, but I think it's a pretty good bet that 10 years from now, there's going to be something from Ghost that's looked back on as a, genre-defining classic that I think especially got a lot of not really like metal people. They're maybe sort of like, rock. The kind of people that would be into like Mastodon, I think, are the type of people that get into Ghost, which is sort of a different audience, than real metal people or like Warped Tour people. A couple people brought all these bands up: Lorna Shore, Electric Cowboy, Spirit Box, Ice Nine Kills, Motionless in White. A lot of the, I'll say like reaction core bands. All the bands that people pretend to hear for the first time, like Lifelong Metalhead reacts to Spirit Box, all these bands that blew up off of reactions. And the one in particular that I wanted to focus on here is Electric Cowboy. 30 million views in 2 years for a German band is no joke. Yeah, Ginger would be on the same list. With Electric Cowboy in particular, my understanding is that they're like kind of a semi-mainstream band in Germany. They had like a #1 album in Germany, and I know they play like arenas in Europe and stuff. Will they be seen as a classic in the future? My guess is Electric Cowboy is going to be looked back on. Maybe I would say something like I Set My Friends on Fire or Attack Attack, in the sense of, do people think I Set My Friends on Fire is classic? Kind of. Like, yes, but no. I think people look back fondly on I Set My Friends on Fire. They're definitely fun, but does anybody like sit down and listen to I Set My Friends on Fire because they think the music is amazing? Not necessarily. A Cobra Starship is a good comparison, yeah. Do people look back on Cobra Starship and say, like, that music changed my life? No, but they were certainly very popular, and they did get a lot of attention for the genre. And so there's some number of people that listened to Cobra Starship and I Set My Friends on Fire that ended up getting into, maybe more like quote unquote real music. So, we'll see. I think Electric Cowboy is a little bit too much of a meme band to be considered a classic per se, but people will certainly remember them. Yeah, Bloodhound Gang is a good comparison. I think everyone will remember Electric Cowboy. Whether people will look back on it as a classic or not, I would guess not, but who knows? Maybe so. Either way, they'll certainly have a fond place in people's hearts. Let's put it that way. I got a few replies that said things along these lines from Cedar. To be honest, I don't feel like there's a whole lot of songs in the genre right now that have significant staying power. Maybe I'm just not invested enough in the scene, but the current sonic landscape just feels dime a dozen. And I'm kind of on the fence with this one because I agree with her, but maybe I don't. And what I mean is this. Basically, this is what every single person said about every artist in the new generation forever. Meaning that, when Green Day and Blink came out and The Offspring, they said, oh, this stuff is not going to have any staying power. Nobody's going to remember this over real music like blah, blah, blah. They said the same thing about nu metal. They said the same thing about A Day to Remember. They said the same thing about Panic at the Disco. And all of that was false. So I think that it's natural that when you get older and you're less kind of like emotionally invested in music compared to when you're 14, it feels like it's not as important. And that might be true to you, but it's never true. Like when people say, oh, this current generation of stuff has no staying power, I think that's never true. With that said, I think a lot of the songwriting right now in rock and metal is kind of crappy. I think the best, most creative people are doing rap and pop and stuff like that rather than rock and metal. So I do think the current generation of rock is a little bit bland. However, I'm also an old man. It is impossible for me to be as invested in this stuff as a 16-year-old is. So maybe I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong. I thought this was another interesting way to look at it. Rock and metal aren't built for that anymore. And to me, this is kind of, I've talked about this a million times, so I'm not going to go on and on about it. But I kind of agree with that rock and metal aren't built for that anymore because they don't want to be. Rock and metal, it's all about nostalgia. We appreciate bands when the time has passed. I respectfully disagree. That's what I think too. I think rock does not want to make classics. They don't want to write songs. They don't want to make moments. They don't want to have stars. They just sort of want to celebrate the past. And so I think this is true. There's no reason why rock can't be creating classics, but I think they just don't really want to. Rock is more formulaic than the pop artists most fans talk shit on. That is 100% correct. Absolutely. Rock and metal have chosen to be niche. Any attempt at reaching a broader audience is looked at as an exit from the rock and metal scene, or doing something sonically different, that people refuse to think that Lil Uzi Vert has anything to do with rock, which, as I've talked about before, I think is nonsense, but I think that's kind of true. The last one I wanted to talk about, which a lot of people mentioned, was Sleep Token. Sleep Token will have a lot of classics or songs that a whole generation will collectively remember. It's still kind of early with Sleep Token. It's kind of hard to say. It's always possible. You know, they could be the next Deftones. Who knows? But my guess is probably not. I think that they are going to be a very successful cult band. I think they could be the next Dance Gavin Dance, or the next Protest the Hero, or one of these artists that has like a super, super dedicated fan base that will take a bullet for them. Dillinger Escape Plan, maybe. They could be the next Dillinger, or Every Time I Die. They could definitely be that. Absolutely. I think there's a very good chance of that. And so they could be a classic in the sense of, you know, one of these cult bands that a relatively small number of people worships and absolutely loves. But I personally think it's going to be difficult for them to get too much bigger than that. But who knows? I think it's still too early to see. Either way, I will say that I'm happy that they're having this moment. Even though I'm not the biggest fan of their music personally, anytime that an alternative artist has any kind of a breakout moment, I'm happy to see it. Whether I like their music or not, it makes me happy. And I certainly hope that they do, you know, go down as the next Fall Out Boy. That would be awesome. I would love that. We shall see. But those are my thoughts on the artists who will be the next generation of classics. That's what I think. We shall see.